And these are actually from existing business leaders. These are people like yourselves within IT or within business operations who are asking these types of questions. And what we're saying here and what we're trying to get across is that you need to ask yourself questions at the very beginning to identify those motivations for moving to Azure as part of your migration and building out a strong business case of those motivations. The key thing as well is they don't need to just be technical. So you need to put yourselves in the shoes of other areas of the business, of other stakeholders within the business, and really come up with a list of questions as what they would be asking, how it impacts them in terms of migration. So then you can start to look at the different motivations that come off the back of that. So a basic example would be around how can I secure my network and assets, for example. That then leads to a various set of objectives that you might have there, or further questions or answers that you then start to mold your migration strategy around, and then also put into your business case from a motivations perspective, that with Azure I can safely secure my network, I can reduce my costs, I can reduce the hassle and the headache with regards to people managing that network, and that builds a more of a robust and rounded business case and motivation set that you want to obviously get everybody on board on with regards to your migration. In terms of migration triggers, these are really, again, more about the actual motivation. So once you've asked that question or made up those list of questions that you might have, then it's about actually mapping the motivations to it and then making some value around them. So for example, basic examples could be your cash flow challenges. So this could be not just for yourself or your customers, but it could be the entire ecosystem. There might be cash flow challenges from your suppliers, from your distributors, from your end customers. And this all feeds into the motivations and the objectives that you're trying to achieve from your migration. So for example, if you can produce your products at a less of a cost to you, or less of a cost of sale to you, then that can impact your customers by charging a less of a price to them at the end price, but also being able to introduce new revenues into your organization and gain traction within your market. That might be a motivation that you put within the business case that's going to resonate with those stakeholders that aren't just technically minded. You might have motivations around business continuity. So customers, they might have concerns about sort of the day-to-day operations being interrupted, but also yourselves. You want to be able to make sure that your business maintains its productivity in various situations. So again, asking those questions: what happens if this happens? What happens here? Does this team still operate if this happens? And really then mapping out those business continuity motivations and triggers for moving to Azure. Obviously, COVID is a key example around business continuity and remote working. And those that obviously already had remote working in terms of whether it's using modern workplace licensing or whether it's adopting things like Windows Virtual Desktop are ahead of the curve and able to mitigate that risk of an event like COVID in a much better way than those that hadn't necessarily adopted those or even considered those as part of a motivation for the cloud. Data center contract expiry is obviously a real obvious example there, and again that sort of links into your cash flow as well. So you're viewing contract expiry as a point to reflect basically and consider your cloud migrations. There's no point in renewing data center contracts if it doesn't fit in with your business strategy and your wider goals from a strategic perspective. Cybersecurity threats, being able to rapidly scale your web apps and your infrastructure, again, are all things that can be catalysts for putting those motivations together and putting those motivations to the rest of the organization for a cloud migration. And then probably the key one for the finance side of the business is the budget and resource constraints, and being able to use the cloud to open up new budgets. Everyone will be aware of the transition between CapEx and OpEx, for example. So again, these are the types of things that you need to think about, really ask questions around, and then map out your motivations as part of those migration triggers and build that strong, robust business case for doing so that encapsulates everybody's needs and brings everybody onto the same page. In terms of business outcomes, so there's a nice sort of story there. You start with your questions, the questions then give sort of the motivations around why you would do something, and these are really sort of the outcomes that solidify that and give you sort of a conclusion and a narrative around why you should be doing something in terms of your cloud migration. The key thing is just not to stop at the IT or technical elements. So not just stopping at the data center contract coming to an end. Obviously, that is a motivation for moving to the cloud, but also look at the wider business motivation and what's going to resonate with the rest of the organization. So a basic example with the data center is actually analyzing the cost saving of 15,000 a year in that example, and how that paints a picture to the rest of the organization that are non-technical. IT operational constraints that cause a problem with supporting app development, that can conspire to your ability to support modern application deployment on the cloud, how that improves performance, how that improves the resource workload on app development, and even change management becomes easier. And again, those benefits that are wider than just the technical benefits. Insecure and vulnerable services deployed across a distributed estate. Well, again, this is about making sure your governance is aligned across the organization. So some people on the call no doubt will be in highly regulated industries, where you need to prove that you're compliant, and you need to prove that your governance procedures are robust and that are in place. This type of thing then again helps. So moving to Azure, for example, really helps with governance. Microsoft work really hard to ensure all of their technology estate adheres to the strictest of governance policies across multiple industries, whether that's GDPR or whatever it might be, MiFID if you're in the finance industry. And again, those are the additional benefits of getting across to maybe operations, for example, who spend a lot of time making